Now, it is, in her own words, the First Minister's sacred responsibility to make sure every young person gets the same chance to succeed. In 2015, Nicola Sturgeon made it clear that closing the attainment gap between advantaged and disadvantaged pupils in Scotland's schools would be her defining mission. But earlier this year, the spending watchdog Audit Scotland reported that her government had fallen short, that progress to date has been limited. So what will it take to bridge the divide? Well, Jim Wallace is Director of Children and Family Services at the Aberlour Children's Charity. They work with children from a variety of different backgrounds. Good morning to you, Jim.
Good morning, Laura.
What's your approach then so far on the actions that have been taken over recent years to try and close this gap?
Yeah, well, I think it's first have to acknowledge that it is a wicked problem. It's not easy to resolve, as is shown by the results. And, there's certainly been some good things done, and there's certainly good intentions here, but we certainly need to do more. One of our bits of learning through the pandemic was we have children in residential houses in Scotland. And I was quite worried at the start of the pandemic that, they would feel cooped up and not going to school. It would be a bit of a pressure cooker environment. But what we actually observed was something different. Without some of the pressures of attending mainstream school for these children, they became a bit more relaxed. And some of them were able to apply themselves more positively to learning. So we kicked off a bit of a review in our services in Fife, looking at how we could best support learning. And we got input from children and young people and our staff and our psychologist, Shona Quinn. And, we started to kind of challenge some of the thinking. In education over the years, you've probably heard quite a lot about disengaged pupils and disaffected learners. And that kind of places the problem with the pupil, with the child. And we wanted to kind of turn that thinking around. What do we need to do differently to engage these children and get better results? So,
well, sounds there like that when the kids that you look after were in smaller groups, that they worked better. Does that speak to something that perhaps that ministers need to be looking at and focusing on, is reducing class sizes, that sort of stuff?
Well, I think so. I think we just need sort of different, more flexible and personalised approaches to learning. And we need to understand clearly what the barriers are for learning for children, which will be different. Obviously, if you're going to school and you're hungry, because your family is having to choose between paying the heating bills or putting food on the table, you're not going to be in the best place to study. But there's lots of other obstacles too, emotional obstacles, social obstacles, kind of, people's experience of school, family beliefs about school. So, it's really important that we start to kind of develop more flexible and responsive approaches to children's learning. And, we had initiatives. The Pupil Equity Fund was a worthy initiative trying to kind of address things. But, I think, Aberlour, along with others, were saying, we need to invest some of that money outside the school gates, not just in the in-school activities to help these children.
I wonder, because if schools, I suppose, are dealing with poverty and welfare issues, then there's less concentration on how the kids are getting on educationally. Is that the case?
Yeah. Well, I think there's always a concentration on, but the children just sometimes aren't there, or where they are in school, they're just not in a place where they're able to learn, because all the pressures from home are bearing down upon them as they make their way to school, or don't, as in some instances, because some children have kind of just totally kind of disengaged from school. So, but the thing is, not using those terms like disengaged pupils and disaffected learners is important. We need to take on board the challenge and look at what we need to do differently for them, and there could be a range of different things there.
Well,
and we need a bit
what?
of courage and bravery, I think, to tackle these problems.
Sorry to interrupt. The Education Secretary, Shirley Ann Somerville, is going to make a statement about this, what the government describes as the attainment challenge. She'll make that statement at Holyrood later. We don't know what's in that statement, but what would you like to hear?
Well, I don't think they're going to say that they're going to have a root and branch review of the education system, but, I think they need to acknowledge that there are some cracks in the system. Those cracks are potentially good things, though, in some ways, because they let a little light come in. And I think we need to look at kind of what we can do to kind of change things. And there are a lot of things we can do to lift children out of poverty, to support families better. You know, the Promise Scotland has done a lot of good work to create a kind of pathway forward that makes it better for families in Scotland. And, you know, schools, I think, need to look at how they keep the promise and education and how we can do things differently. But we need to take the responsibility on ourselves and not just leave that responsibility rooted in the children.
I'm going to ask you a horrible question here. If there was one thing that Shelley Somerville could say today that would change things quickly, what would it be?
Well, I think it's. I mean, the structural inequalities that are there. It's poverty that is affecting families the most. So we need to do more to lift. We've got 250,000 children in Scotland. We should have targets about lifting those children out of poverty and making sure that they can have the best possible life to live in Scotland, which is one of the government's kind of aspirations. So, you know, it is for me, it's about tackling poverty. You know, if you're a middle class family and your children are struggling, you can hire tutors, you can do all sorts of things, but these are options that aren't open to a lot of families because they're struggling with their day-to-day existence, and we need to kind of change that.
Is there anything that has been done? I mean, we're talking about Nicola Sturgeon making this statement about the attainment gap in 2015. Is there anything over the last 6 years that has been done that you think has worked what's worked the best, and what should be where the future investment goes?
Well, I think some of the ideas behind the Pupil Equity Fund were good. It's just how it's been applied. You know, I think, you know, it is about looking at not just in-school support, but support to families as well to help address the problems that they're having, which impact on children. You know, so there have been good things, and as I say, there are good policy initiatives, and you know, undoubtedly the intent is positive, but we just need to make better progress in terms of the action. And I think we need to challenge some of those kind of orthodoxies around education. I remember years ago there was an assistant director in Aberdeen who described to me his vision in 1994 for education 20 years ahead, and he was talking about education running from 7 to 11, following the science, not having teenagers trying to go to school and start learning at 8:30, but maybe starting the school day at 11. There's lots of things that could be explored, but they're challenging, you know, and there's a lot of vested interests behind these things.
Can I ask you one final question? What do the kids that you deal with day in, day out make of all this? Do they realise that there's a massive gap and that they're stuck down at the bottom of it sometimes?
Well, you know, I think there's lots of things for them really around, you know, sometimes they feel kind of shame about their abilities. There's things that kind of impact on them. You know, they've kind of, maybe they don't feel perhaps wanted in schools. You know, they've got maybe low mood, high levels of anxiety, some of them, you know. So I think we need to kind of look at all those things, all those barriers that are there to learn, and see what we can do to kind of remove those and help children get these paths towards their learning. I mean, Sir Ken Robinson said that he believed all children have talents, and he said we squander them ruthlessly. And I think we need to get to the point where we can help these children kind of bring their talents to the fore and have that purpose in their life. Know what not just learning to pass exams, but learning to get to the places in life they want to go and have the lives they want to live.
And aspirations. Jim Wallace, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Jim's the Director of Children and Family Services at the Aberlour Children's Charity. The Education Secretary, Shirley Ann Somerville, will make the statement in Holyrood later. We will keep you up to date with what she says throughout the course of the day.
And that is just